Chasing Clarity, Health and Fitness Podcast. Back in the house this week, myself, Jeff Black, Brandon DeCruz. Today's episode 42, how to track progress during a build phase. Low carb versus low fat diets for fat loss, concurrent training, hormonal contraceptives, and collagen protein. Oh, this one's going to be a little bit of depth in here. I see. But first off, B, how's your last 7 days been? When we're getting ready to see each other in Tampa, I get to hug your like 6'9" ass and stuff. It's gonna be weird. And
you better
stuff.
Break out a chair and get ready to.
I know. I have to get up on your neck
man.
and shit. Yeah, fuck yeah. So how's your last 7 been?
Dude, everything's been going well on my end, man. Honestly, this past week, every spare minute I have, I mentioned this to you off air. I've literally just been in PubMed. I've been either working on my coursework to get ahead of schedule, because obviously I will be flying out this upcoming week for the PEC, but everything else has been dedicated towards just reading studies for this weekend's PEC presentation. And I got to be honest with you, and I'm sure this is not a surprise to you because you know me very well, and how I do anything is how I do everything. So I definitely got a little carried away in terms of the amount of information that I've summarized and packed into this presentation. And in all honesty, I practiced it. It's 2 hours long. So I need to take some out. However, this PowerPoint presentation is already over 40 slides. But that's not surprising to anyone that knows me, whether you have seen me present in person or even on the podcast. Like, I'm someone that I really do value going extremely in depth on any topic that I cover. So I'm really looking forward to this presentation down in Tampa and to be alongside you as well as the rest of the crew. I'm going to be able to, reconnect with a lot of coaches that I respect, people like Lauren and yourself and Jason and the rest of the crew. And then also finally meet one of my mentors since day one, who's been on the podcast, Alan Aragon. So I'm so much looking forward to that. And as well as Scott Stevenson. I always love, catching up with Scott. So it's going to be something I'm really looking forward to, but I'm also looking forward to presenting an area or a viewpoint on increasing insulin sensitivity from every aspect. I mean, I have covered every single minute detail that you could think of. So I really am looking forward to really delivering value. I have more citations than anyone can imagine. I'm probably only going to be exceeded by Alan Aragon on this one, because I do know he has a book that has about 300 plus citations. So he's probably going to lean on that. However, I'm really looking forward to this presentation, getting down there. And other than that, man, everything is going well on my end. How about yourself?
Dude, so for me, I got myself a hot tub this past Saturday and an infrared sauna. So I've been saving for that infrared sauna for a while. So that's what most people don't understand. So I read this, my accountant explained something to me and that's part of the reason I'm able to grow my business is debt free. And I do this personally, is I have a lot of accounts that I move money through. So one accounts for vacation, one accounts for like my future, I want to fuck a horse fund. Another account could be for my illicit drugs I want to buy, whatever. But I have all these different accounts. So I've been putting money away from every paycheck towards the infrared sauna. So I got one for the house. And then I decided to get myself a hot tub too. And it's mostly for pain management. Like my arthritis, at the end of the day, I just don't feel so good. So rather than kind of let it impact my mood and make the last 3 hours of my day kind of suck, I figured I'd take matters in my own hand and kind of, get some things that would heat my body up and help me feel better. Because I started noticing, man, like on my car ride home, I was just like, I didn't feel good. So therefore I'd be just like slightly chippy. And I was like, man, my kid don't need this when I walk in the door after a long day, and stuff like that. So I got the infrared sauna, decided to do the hot tub, pour some concrete. My patio is now a sunroom. So I'll have like a nice little setup in the back, I mean, it's like it's creating an oasis for my house, like why would I want to leave? So with me being in prep, business growing, like I still need in-person trainers, man. If you are a female listening, I do really well with women, like not in a weird fucked up way, but you've met Thera, Katie, Aaron.
Absolutely.
I do really well working with women. I need female in-person clients, just like I need Brandon to come down and assistant manage halfway during my day to help Jason, Coley, and I with the gym. I need people who really want to grow. I mean, the in-person training is booming. And I think you're going to see that more and more, man. I know that it's tough to kind of get back out there once you do the in-person. But I tell a lot of coaches, if you're struggling with building online, if you do in-person, I think Brandon, we've had this conversation before, but when you're in an in-person training, you just get different conversations with people and you just can have, I don't know, some really good conversations to just make you, I think, a better online personality or a better online coach. And, but anyway, before I just go rambling down this road, Literally, man, in-person training is like the thing that most people are craving. I think 2020 made people realize whether they like it or not, they kind of have to be around people to some degree. You know what I mean?
No,
And kind of
absolutely.
figuring it out. So
I think a lot of people are lacking connection. And also just
agreed.
as a caveat to that, I have, commented on this before. I think that anyone that is in online personal trainer or online coach, nutrition training, all those things would benefit highly if they don't have like I spent years in the gym coaching people in person, and I got away from it because of my corporate career and due to the responsibilities of office life as well as running an online business. In addition, I did not have the time and was not able to situate that or fit that into my schedule as you have been able to. However, I learned an immense amount from the years that I spent on the personal training floor, and what I've really seen within the last few years is a lot of individuals that have gotten into the online coaching space, and these are even include individuals that I've mentored. You know what I mean? In terms of other coaches within this space, and when I asked them about their experience or their background within coaching itself, it started online. So they're lacking that ability to really connect with people on a one-on-one basis, really be able to read people's biofeedback, their body language, be able to auto-regulate things. They're a lot of times, not to categorize every person that has gotten into online training without an in-person training background, but oftentimes I find that a lot of people that don't have experience with in-person training are more so programmers than they are coaches because they've never gotten their hands on someone. And I
Right.
don't mean that in any rude of a manner or anything like that, but really being in person, really touching someone, having them activate their muscles during a workout, or being able to really connect with someone one-on-one. Once you learn that in person and you're able to coach someone, like I started doing check-ins in person. People would come see me in the gym, and I would look over them, and at the time it was a lot of physique competitors, so they would do their posing in front of me and I would give them feedback, and then I'd go home and I have notes on my phone or even at one point in a notebook, and then I would type up their updates, their programming. And still to this day, even some of my higher level athletes, like you've seen me fly out for many of shows to
Yep.
see some of my pros and stuff, and really see them in person, really coach them through those last few days of the peaking process. And that really comes from my background and my experience doing in-person coaching. So even if someone is already established within the online coaching space and you don't have that experience, there is great benefit and utility to taking a couple months and maybe going to a hybrid model, almost like you do, where you start coaching people in person, whether it be one-on-one personal training or even in-group personal training, and really getting that in-person, one-on-one, hands-on experience.
I just think, there's just something for having conversation in a dynamic way. And there's only so much you could do in the online space. And I think everybody's always struggling and wanting to live at home with this. Like, I want to live at home, but how my boundaries are and all these different things. And I'll be honest, man, I just make my schedule the way I like my day. That literally is how it is.
But
But
let's comment on the fact you're 20 years into this. So this is not
true.
everyone's situation. And we always have to put that caveat into play, because a lot of, younger and bridling coaches in this industry might hear how you have your day scheduled and might, aspire to be like you, but it took a lot of years of grinding, a lot of years where you lived in the gym, because we've had these conversations. Or in terms of my business, where I've spent my entire day on the computer. It doesn't, this isn't, one of the negatives about this industry is a lot of people have a misperception of really what online coaching is, or even in-person coaching. They think it's, a few hours a day and then you're kicking back with a bunch of money. That's not how it is. It's getting your hands dirty, and it's hard work, whether it's on the gym floor or if it's in the office. You know what I mean? Either way, it's a lot of long hours. It's a lot of investing into other individuals and investing into yourself, your education, and really garnering skills that you're going to be able to apply to a broad-based audience, and really being able to dive in deeper and go beyond the X's and O's of just nutrition and training, and really diving deep into someone's psychology, their background, their history, their preferences, all of these individual characteristics that really set coaches apart from programmers.
100%, man. Let's get tackled into this stuff. All's really well in our worlds, it sounds like. And, based on that one bad review we got, we can't talk too much about our days before we piss people off. So we'll get into the education. Q&A, how to track progress during a building phase. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. Let's fire it off with you, because I think that some people, I'll be curious to see what you say, and then we can have the conversation. Do people over analyze this part just because they get a little tired of being fluffy and watery? So we'll have probably a good conversation on this for sure. So how do people track their progress during a building phase?
Yeah, so when it comes to tracking muscle growth progress during a building phase, I think it's important to first realize and hit on the fact that we can't directly and accurately measure muscle growth to the gram amount like we would our food intake. And this is something we actually covered early on in our episodes. I believe it was episode 19, which was all about body comp assessments and how, whether it be a DEXA or it be a BIA or an InBody, these are not accurate measurements of both muscle and fat mass. So this is where I like to use other proxies of muscle growth to determine the rate of progress during a building phase. So, considering the fact that muscle growth is the main goal within a building phase, there's going to be certain things that I'm looking at. So the first thing that I like to look at is a client or a person's visual appearance and their improvement in progress photos. And photos are a great metric to track our progress through, especially since the scale doesn't tell the complete story about what's going on with our physiques. And I like to have clients take weekly progress photos in the same lighting, the same environment, or the same room essentially, and at around the same time. And then what I do is I compare photos across the course of a building phase as a way to view the changes and the progress that is being made over time, especially as most clients have the goal of improving their body composition. And the goal of adding muscle is in order to improve their body composition. So what they look like visually is the most important thing that we can pay attention to. So this is why this is always my first metric. And using progress photos also allows me to see where a client's weak points are that need to be worked on, which informs some of the adjustments and decisions I'll make on how I program their training, especially in subsequent phases. So if I see, for instance, I like using a lot of specialization cycles with training programs for my advanced clients. So I might be focusing, I'll give an example. One of my high-level clients or one of my advanced clients, Jeremiah Bayer, we're currently in a chest and bicep specialization cycle. So there's increased frequency, increased intensity, and increased focus on these two muscle groups. So a priority muscle, which is the chest, a larger muscle group, and then a smaller muscle group being the biceps. And so week to week and over the course of months, I'm looking at a comparative analysis. I'm pulling up photos on my computer of the first week of the mesocycle of that specialization cycle, and then across the course of the cycle. So, 4 weeks later, 8 weeks later, 12 weeks later, and looking at not only the overall progress within his physique, but especially within these muscle groups. But at the same time, say that we get 12 or 16 weeks into a building phase, and I notice that his deltoids are falling behind, or that his back is lagging in comparison to, so his posterior chain muscles are lagging in proportion to his anterior chain muscles. That's where I will start, essentially making adjustments to the program, either to pull back on chest and biceps or to specifically transition him into the next specialization cycle that will focus on those lagging muscle groups. So always I'm going to start with the visual appearance and a progress photos from an analysis perspective. The next thing I like to look at is training performance. So you want to be tracking your performance in the gym because this is a really important metric, especially during a building phase, because we want to ensure progress is either progressing or is being maintained, which is necessary to build tissue. So, I see a lot of people, and I'm sure you've seen this because you own a gym yourself, they're not logging anything. They're not tracking anything. They're just kind of going through the motions. They're doing different workouts every single day of the week. There's no congruency. There's no consistency within their programming. And I think one of the biggest mistakes behind that is just the fact that a lot of people don't log their training in and of itself. But logging and tracking your training sessions and training performance is important because if you're gaining muscle, you should be able to increase your rep strength from mesocycle to mesocycle, as a bigger muscle is generally a stronger muscle, which is capable of higher force output. So we want to see training performance trend up over time as an indicator of muscle growth. And then the last thing I like to look at is scale weight averaged over a weekly basis. So we really want to see is the scale moving in the direction we want it to be. So if we're in a building phase and we have the goal of accruing tissue, we should see, scale weight moving up, trending up over time. That doesn't mean week to week that it's going up dramatically, but we should see it trending up over the course of an elongated building phase. And this, scale weight, I'll never say that scale weight is everything. It isn't. However, it is an indication of our state of energy balance. So whether we're in a calorie surplus, we're at maintenance calories, or if we're in a calorie deficit. And I like having clients do this, do their scale weight on a daily basis so that we can pick up on any fluctuations that occur as a result of changes in their water intake, their sodium, maybe different nutritional choices or food sources, and then also stress and sleep, which can provide us with a more accurate view of how the various factors in their program and lifestyle are affecting them. And really what I'm trying to do is get a weekly average to smooth out those fluctuations, because if you only take a scale weight metric or a scale weight weigh-in one day per week, we could really be picking up on these days that you have massive fluctuations. So one week it may be substantially high, and then you might catch yourself on the next week, if you only weigh in one time, on a low day. So it looks like you're in a deficit, but really it was just fluctuations in water, glycogen, sodium, and different, various inputs. And so we really want to kind of smooth away all those fluctuations throughout the week and really look at weekly averages. And so when we're looking to build muscle, you should be slowly gaining weight over the period of time. And this is where like tracking of that metric comes into play. So those are the three metrics that I would generally, I personally use with myself and with my clientele, and that I would advise others to use during a building phase, with the goal being to grow and accrue muscle tissue.
Do you use blood glucose numbers and or blood work as well when you're in these phases?
But not for the direct. No, absolutely. So I'm tracking other objective metrics. I'm looking at blood glucose. I'm looking at blood pressure. I'm looking at resting heart rate. But these aren't direct indications of someone's actual muscle growth ability. So this is why I did not include them. I have various metrics, and it's really going to depend on the client in and of itself. However, those are more health-based biomarkers. These are indications of their metabolic health status. But that's a completely different quality than the actual proxies that are used to measure muscle growth.
Okay. What diet is better for fat loss, low carb or low fat?
What are your thoughts, my man?
I personally think they both work. It's just a matter of finding out what people can kind of stick to the longest. You know what I mean? And that goes back to how long you get a client, right? Like, and what's the average client stays? About a year online?
My average for when I did my statistics in 2022 was 14 months.
Yeah, I'm about like 14, 15. I think most fall about like 8 to 12, probably.
Actually,
right?
Industry average is 3 months.
Oh,
However,
okay. Well, you just gave me a new number. So therefore, I was being generous. I think a lot of it is like, one, you got to collect someone's dieting history. Two, you got to kind of understand, okay, where are they coming at you from? Like, what's their mindset at? What are they like? What does past pictures of their definition of man, I was ripped look like? Because I've seen people be like, I was shredded, and I'll get up, be like, man, you like 15% body fat. Okay, like that's not bad. That was a good goal, right? But we could do better. And then I think it's kind of understanding, like, I always ask, what are trigger foods when I talk to people? And I think understanding that kind of helps me understand where I want to start with them. But I've seen both work, man. For me personally, both work. I've tried them with both people. I think that when you're more in the fat loss phase, I personally like more carbohydrates and lower fats. Like I'll put my fats down to 15 grams. Wow. And my carbs are around like 250 though. And I will generally do better. Like my workouts are better, things like that. I've gone with the low carb approach before, and like I don't digest fat that well. So therefore, for me, it just never, I don't feel comfortable. And I haven't seen a difference in how lean I could get either approach. And I personally will do better with the lower fat options than I would do the higher carb options, because I like my fruit. And I think that whereas I've seen like one guy who I'm working with right now, we're getting him ready for a show, and he is more low carb because he does better on fats and he feels better and all that. But I had plenty of time to figure that out. And I think a lot of that comes down to figuring out, I know there's a lot of nuances in here and things like that. But for me, man, I think that most people kind of maybe overcomplicate this. I think it's, if you can look objectively at your past and say, okay, what realm did I do better in? And if so, then you sub answer that out with how much of an asshole was I on either of these diets? Do you know what I mean? Like, did I do the low fat diet? And then I found myself, once I ate, say, for example, something I shouldn't, it blew my doors off. Or then, if you're
floodgates.
If you're a low carb dieter, then it would be like, I had some peanut butter, and before you know it, the whole jar was digested. You know what I mean? And I've seen that before, and I know you have, right?
That's why.
So, and then you find out that person, if you just put on a higher carb diet, they do really well. And there's no sense for it. I think what people want, they often can't have when it comes to their body. And I think a lot of this progress of fat loss tends to be making negotiations with yourself on what you really want versus how hard you're going to work for it versus the quality of life you want as a reflection of that.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. I think when we look at diets for fat loss, the most important component of the diet is to ensure a calorie deficit is not only created, but maintained. So it is something you can not only adhere to and institute, but also consistently adhere to and really hit day in and day out. And then also the secondary component of the diet for fat loss is to ensure that protein intake is adequate.
Right.
So when calories and protein are equated between diets, we see very similar fat loss results between both low carb diets and low fat, low carb, high fat diets, and then low fat, high carb diets. We have numerous studies that reinforce this, but two of the best pieces of evidence that we have that reinforce the fact that both of these diets work come from Dr. Kevin Hall and then Dr. Chris Gardner. And what I really find interesting about these two researchers is they take two completely different approaches to the research design, but they come to very similar conclusions in almost every study that they do. So almost all of Kevin Hall's studies, if anyone's familiar with them, they're done in these tightly controlled metabolic ward type scenarios where everything is monitored in the lab. Subjects are living in there. They have all their food provided to them. Everything's weighed out to the exact gram. Whereas in Chris Gardner's studies, he usually conducts what are called free living studies. Yet they both produce findings that we can apply to our fat loss approaches. So for instance, in 2015, Kevin Hall conducted a metabolic ward crossover study to compare the effects of a calorie-equated low carb and low fat diet on fat loss. And what he did was he took individuals into the lab and he put them on a baseline diet. And then he randomized them to either 6 days of a lower carb, high fat diet or a lower fat, high carb diet. And in the low carb diet, they were getting 140 grams of carbs per day, whereas in the high carb diet, they were getting 352 grams of carbs per day. So there was about a threefold, difference between the two. And what they did was they decided to utilize, when I say a crossover study, that means that each participant of the study went through each arm. So they went through each condition. So, in 1 week period, one participant would go through the low carb arm, and then he would have a washout period, and then they'd go into the high carb arm and vice versa. And the results found that insulin came down about the same in both groups, regardless of whether it was low carb or high carb. And then the low fat diet led to slightly greater fat loss, or the low fat rather, led to slightly greater fat loss, but it was clinically insignificant given it was a 6-day period. So participants saw very similar fat loss outcomes between the two. Then we have the Diet Fits trial, which is one of the most famous trials on weight loss. And that was by Chris Gardner's group. And essentially what he did was he conducted this study to determine the effect of a healthy, low-fat diet versus a healthy, low-carbohydrate diet on weight change. And he also looked at if genotype, pattern, or insulin secretion were related to the dietary effects on weight loss. And in this study, what he did was he split people into either low carb or low fat and had them start out with a significant restriction of carbs or fat at first. And then he had them titrate up to an intake that they could sustain over the course of 12 months. So this was a long-term study. It was over a year period. And the results found that both groups, whether it was low carb or low fat, they lost the same amount of weight. Their fasting glucose and fasting insulin came down about the same, and they saw no significant difference between diets. And the participants got the same metabolic health benefits, whether they went low carb or low fat, as these improvements were predominantly due to their weight loss. Now, here's a caveat in this study. They made sure that diet quality was high in both groups. So whether they were on a low carb diet or they were on a low fat diet, it was filled with whole foods, vegetables, fruits. It was a really high quality diet. It was protein controlled. All these things were equivalent between the two diets, which kind of equated how each approach was. So each was a quality approach to fat loss. And the only thing that they saw was the only big difference that they saw was at the end of the 12-month trial, low carb group really wasn't eating low carb anymore. So they had titrated their initial carb intake from, I think it was 20 or 30 grams initially, all the way up to 132 grams per day. So they had went from, say, a low carbohydrate diet to more of a moderate carbohydrate diet. And that really just came down to what they could adhere to and what was sustainable, because it was over the course of 12 months. So both of these studies reinforce the fact that the best diet for fat loss is the one that you could stick to. So whether it is a low fat, high carb diet or it's a low carb, high fat diet, both are going to have equivalent outcomes if you can sustain a calorie deficit, if they fit your lifestyle, if they fit your training goals, your performance, your body composition goals. And so really when it comes down to it, there isn't a best diet. It is the best diet to fit you, fit your lifestyle at that time, and something that you can consistently stick to.
I'm glad we kind of both agree on that, because I always, I've had people be like, oh, are you doing that fad diet keto with people? I'm like, how's it fad if it works? I'm like, we label it as a fad. It's not a fad if it works. If the person is successful and enjoys it, that's their life, not yours. Leave it alone. So I'm glad. Concurrent training and muscle gain. What do they mean by concurrent training? I
Okay.
want to kind of break that out a little bit so one can understand that.
Absolutely. So concurrent training is the idea or the concept of combining both resistance training and aerobic training during a program. That doesn't mean that we're doing resistance training right into a cardio session, but it means that throughout the course of a program, of a, whether it be a building phase, a fat loss phase, whatever it may be, that you're doing both modalities of exercise. So this question actually came from a listener of the show after our recent podcast episode with Dr. Bill Campbell, because in that episode, towards the latter portion of the episode, he discussed the fact that he's currently working on a systematic review on concurrent training and fat loss. Now, this listener specifically wanted to know what we thought about doing concurrent training when the goal is to gain muscle, and also what we think the results of Dr. Campbell's systematic review will be in terms of how combining aerobic training with resistance training will impact fat loss outcomes. So when it comes to the first question, I don't believe that concurrent training has a negative effect on muscle gain, which is something that people used to often claim, like cardio will kill your gains. That's a common, statement that many in the fitness industry had made. But, the most recent meta-analysis that I've read on this topic, which is by Schumann et al., looked at the effects of concurrent training where someone performs both resistance training and aerobic exercise and its impact on muscle growth and strength, and found that concurrent aerobic and resistance training does not compromise muscle hypertrophy and maximal strength development, even when compared to resistance training on its own.
Yeah.
And we also have a recent study by Thomas et al., which found that aerobic conditioning prior to resistance training can increase muscle hypertrophy and satellite cell content in healthy young men and women. And so in this study, this is a fascinating study. This recently just came out within the last 2 to 3 months. And when I was reading through it a few months ago, when it came out, it made a ton of sense, but also I think it actually kind of throws that debate of cardio kills your gains in the exact opposite direction. It really disproves that. So in this study, they took healthy young men and women and had them do a 6-week aerobic training intervention done through unilateral cycling with one leg. So essentially what they did was they had one leg not do cardio at all, not do any aerobic training. And then the other leg, they had them do cycling. So one leg was getting that aerobic training effect.
Uh-huh.
And they did this so that each subject could act as its own control. Then after this 6-week aerobic training intervention, they had them engage in a 10-week bilateral, meaning both legs, lower body resistance training program. So they did the aerobic training first, and then they put them into a resistance training program. And the results found that the leg that did both aerobic and resistance training exercise, so they did concurrent training essentially, increased type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers, whereas the leg that only did resistance training increased only their type 2 muscle fiber size. So the leg that did both experience more total growth in total, and the satellite cell content activation and differentiation was greater in the leg that did both aerobic and resistance training. So essentially what this study found was that aerobic training can help and can augment, so it can better or amplify essentially resistance training outcomes. And this makes sense not only from the findings of the study, but also if we think about what aerobic training does, cardiovascular training does, it's going to help to increase recovery capacity, because recovery is an aerobic activity. It's also going to increase your recovery between sets. So you're going to be able to get more work output. You're going to be able to maintain a higher work output in your actual sets and in between or during your workouts. And it's also going to lessen cardiovascular fatigue. So a lot of times when people don't have great aerobic fitness, they're unable to do high rep sets, or they get gassed. They get more of a cardiometabolic fatigue, where they can't, sustain, they can't actually get to failure due to, lack of aerobic fitness, rather than due to a muscular fatigue perspective. So if anything, I believe that doing aerobic training will actually help muscle gain, not take away from it. Now, when it comes to the other question, so when it comes to, they asked about Dr. Campbell's systematic review, which is specifically looking at doing concurrent training and its impact on fat loss. I think it'll show a beneficial effect on fat loss. And, if we look at the research, research has shown that adding in cardio can be an effective modality to improve fat loss outcomes. So if you're someone who only does resistance training currently, yet your goal is to drop some body fat, it could be to your advantage to add in some cardio. And one study that demonstrates the potential benefits of adding cardio into a fat loss phase was done by Queen's University. And in this randomized control trial, they either put participants into a nutrition only or a cardio only group. So in the nutrition only group, they use diet in order to create a deficit to lose weight. Whereas in the cardio only group, they just use exercise in and of itself to create a deficit. And at the end of 3 months, both the nutrition and the cardio only groups had lost the same amount of body weight. But when you actually look at the results and the subgroup analysis, you'll see that the cardio group lost more total fat mass. So out of the weight that they lost more fat mass and maintained more lean body mass than the diet group. So when it comes to optimizing our fat loss outcomes, I believe that doing a combination of resistance training and cardio in addition to diet will yield the best result in terms of fat loss outcomes and then also muscle preservation. So I'm looking forward to seeing Dr. Campbell's findings on this study, because he's actually, I don't know if he mentioned this on the podcast itself, but this is actually the first systematic review. So this is the first time that any research group has taken a look at both resistance training and aerobic training and its impact on fat loss in and of itself. So he's going to have a first of its kind systematic review, which is a study of studies essentially. And so he's going to be putting something that's novel out into the research community. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the overall findings of this.
I think I agree with you 100%. Well, actually, I don't think I agree with you 100%. Better said. Cardio for muscle gain. I think most people like ditch that, like just be like, oh no, like their off-season plans and stuff like that. I think you can push the building phases further. It maintains insulin sensitivity, and generally training is more productive. People can just handle more load. That 20 rep hack squat, yeah, that might be brutal if you do no cardio, but if you do some hit, you do some miss, and you kind of keep with your steps, you can generally train that and get some different fibers and get some different growth. So I'm glad that you brought that up and everything. How does hormonal? Oh, by the way, if you guys aren't subscribed, Bill Campbell, he releases that newsletter. It's what, $6.99 a month? I think it's what it is. Yeah. I'd sign up for it, guys. He's got some good stuff in there. Brandon, you've contributed to that, haven't you? Or you're on the docket.
I've spoken to him about doing so. So hopefully I will get an opportunity. I would love to contribute to it because it is a really good piece.
Yeah, no, he does good work. How does hormonal birth control impact training?
All right. So we have actually a recent meta-analysis that looked at females' muscle and strength gain as well as performance. And essentially this meta-analysis found that strength gain and performance is usually a bit better in naturally menstruating females. So those who are not currently using hormonal contraceptions. But I think it's really important to realize that these were very small differences between groups. And there's a lot of people in this industry, they kind of sell like this narrative that if you are on hormonal birth control, it's going to impede your muscle gain. It is going to hamper your training performance. And really, we have studies that go both ways. So we have studies that show that, women that are on hormonal birth control have better training performance outcomes. And then we have the opposite. But really, when we look at a study of studies, it's a very slight difference between the two. And I think the caveat here is that when females are taking hormonal contraceptions or contraceptives, it's usually to deal with negative side effects that they feel as a result of their natural menstrual cycle or to prevent pregnancy, both of which would negatively impact a female's training. So say, for instance, you are someone that you have a really difficult time with, PMS or PMDD or with your menstrual cycle and these fluctuations between hormones, you may be out of the gym as a result of that. So you won't be getting any productive training. So when we look at this research, we need to realize that many females are taking these medical interventions for a reason. And if they were to come off, they may deal with side effects that would impact their training performance more than staying on in and of itself. And the differences that we do see in training performance and muscle gain between women who do use, hormonal birth control and who don't are so small that they might come out in the wash when we consider that if someone does suffer from, really severe PMS or PMDD, that they may, their training may be less productive when they aren't taking hormonal birth control. So they may see less gains in the long term. And these studies are only looking at very short periods of time and looking at performance outcomes and muscle gain outcomes over 8 to 12 weeks, where we really don't see a lot of muscle growth in and of itself in that period. And the differences are even smaller. So they may be statistically significant, but they're not clinically significant. And I think that's a big difference people need to realize. When a study reports statistical significance, that doesn't mean that it has real world application. It doesn't mean that those differences, it might be a 0.5%, but it might not add up over the course of time, nor also we have to realize that studies report averages. So this might not apply to you if you are a female listener out there. And I'll tell you from my own experience coaching many females over the years, there are some women that they're naturally menstruating and they don't really suffer from any side effects. And then I have other females that have come to me taking hormonal birth control as a result of trying to mitigate the side effects that they've had as a result of their natural menstrual cycle. So they were the female that was out for a week to 10 days every month or every cycle that they had because they had such severe side effects. And what we really have to realize is that it's not like these drugs hinder women from gaining muscle and strength. Anytime we look at these outcomes, both groups are gaining muscle, both groups are increasing training performance. They're just slight differences. So I think the issue here is that many will take research like this and frame it as hormonal birth control is a net negative for training performance and body composition. And I think that actually has a more profound effect on women than anything else, than the actual outcomes of these drugs. Because when you really think about it, if there's a lot of people within this industry that's fear monger, and they put that information out and they kind of misextrapolate it, or they kind of label it as it's going to be an automatic net negative. And this is something that can negatively affect someone from a psychological perspective, which could cause a nocebo effect. So some of the stuff that we might be seeing in the research might be just due to someone's preconceived notion of the impact that hormonal birth control is supposed to have on their training performance. And we see the same thing when we look at menstrual cycle periodization, when we look at the undulations in hormones. And there's a lot of women sometimes that are more educated that come to me, that they're personal trainers themselves or they're coaches, and they tell me that they've heard that towards the latter portion of their menstrual cycle, they should be feeling worse. They shouldn't be training as well. Or during the follicular phase, that they should have better training. And oftentimes it's not based off of their actual personal experience. It's based off what they've heard or what they've seen on social media. And I think it's really important that we remove what we hear on social media or what we hear other people speak about and what we actually experience ourselves, because we are an N of one, meaning you are your own experiment. So there are going to be individuals that see benefits in terms of their body composition and training performance as a result of taking hormonal birth control. And there's going to be some that see, a negative effect, but you are your own, personal N of one. And also from a coaching perspective, I'm only here to guide individuals, but it is way out of my scope of practice to tell a female whether they should or shouldn't be on hormonal birth control based on training performance. Like I'm always going to value their and
I know what you mean though. I know what you mean.
There's a lot of coaches in this space that want to tell, females, especially like competitors, that they need to get off birth control. And that's a real issue that I have, because that is a medical intervention that is way outside of your scope of practice, first and foremost. And second of all, that person has made, if a woman that I work with, a female that I work with comes to me having used or is using hormonal birth control, that is a decision A, she made before me. B, she made for reasons that trump, that's quality of life reasons. That may be to offset, make sure that they don't become pregnant. These are really higher level priority principles than their training performance outcome over the course of a 12-week fat loss phase. You know what I mean? And that's really where it comes down to, I'm here to guide you, but I'm not here to tell you or make this value judgment on what you should and shouldn't do.
Yeah. So, I'm like you. I usually will educate my clients on birth control and tell them to get Dr. Jolene Brighton's book, Beyond the Pill, just so they can understand how birth control interacts with the gut microbiome, how it interacts with your thyroid, how it interacts just with different aspects, right? Absolutely. Unlike you. Now, if they talk, a lot of it to me depends upon, before I'll advise, depends upon a couple of things. One, why were they put on the birth control? If they were put on that for acne, then that's like, all right, well, have you maybe like to consider that might be gut more microbiome and have that conversation. If they're with family planning, then I usually will leave it alone, especially if they get along with the birth control. I think that's usually what you see is a lot of women don't shop around on the birth control if they need it for preventing families. And we'll just kind of settle on one their doctor kind of blows off.
Absolutely.
What
I think that's really,
I've seen some girls
our
on
biggest role.
Yeah. And
I think that's our biggest role is educating them on, if they're on birth control and they want to stay on birth control, what are some better options as compared to what they're using, whether it be a different generation. They're on a first generation, they're on a very androgenic, maybe progestin only pill. And that's where we looking at combined pill and going to a third generation that's less androgenic and has less side effects. That's where we're giving them better options. Or if I have a female come to me, I haven't had this in quite some years, but like a Depo-Provera shot, and they're gaining massive weight. That is the one that is the one birth control that we see the most fluctuations in weight gain from. Oftentimes we don't see really body composition or weight gain outcomes from hormonal birth control, especially the newer generations. But if they are on that shot and they're gaining massive weight and they're wondering why they're suffering from insulin resistance and other reasons, it could be tied back to, the modality that they're using. That's where just giving them an education piece. Hey, I understand that you want to stay on this. That is completely up to you. And I'm in full support of whatever decision you make. However, these are better options for you.
I agree with you 100%. And I think a lot of it's just having those. My whole thing is to advocate with the client and understanding what they are trying to do versus where they're at, and just merely using my knowledge to blend in with that. I have seen some girls do extremely well in Marina, and I have seen others just not do well on it. You can always do a copper IUD. There's a lot of talk about copper toxicity, but I know a lot about copper, and that's actually extremely rare. Example, 20,000 micrograms. Okay, so the RDA for copper is 0.9 micrograms. 0.9. Okay. In India, they will take 20,000 micrograms, and it's only got like a 22% fatality rate.
All right, so, that is not us advocating that.
No, exactly.
We're just clearing that up.
I'm just helping people understand that copper toxicity, because that's usually the pushback, but that's a non-hormonal birth control. Mm-hmm. And a lot of women have done really well with that have moved on to that I have worked with. Like, I work with most post competitors. That season of their life is done. They want to get their hormones, sorted out, but they necessarily don't want to have a family and can't risk so forth, and the partner won't get a vasectomy. And I understand that. So if you're a coach and you're listening to this, advocate for your clients depending upon where they're at. And if you're a listener who's on birth control, don't come off of it or make adjustments that you might regret without just based on your training. I think some of that, I'm not saying it's mental, but just sometimes, man, you have those days where, like, you just can't do it. And it just might be a coincidence that it's in your period, or it could be it's every month that it's just that day. And if that's the case, plan for it. You can still adjust and keep winning, and it doesn't have to be the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Collagen protein. Should I count it towards my protein total? Yes, that's what I say. The end. What do you say, Brandon?
All right. So I'll give a little backlog into collagen protein, because these were two questions in terms of our thoughts on collagen protein, and then also whether we should count it towards our dietary protein intake. And I'll, go on both. So just a general overview, collagen is the main protein found in our connective tissues, and it's what essentially gives structure to a lot of connective tissue, such as our skin, as well as our bones and soft tissue like tendons and ligaments. Now, when we look at collagen from a muscle building perspective, it's a lower quality protein source due to the fact that it has a lower proportion of essential amino acids, especially when it comes to its leucine content. So really, when we look at amino acids, we're looking for to trigger muscle protein synthesis and that accretion of new proteins. We want the 9 essential amino acids, specifically leucine, which is that trigger that essentially it turns on the muscle protein synthetic process. So when it comes to muscle growth, collagen protein is not going to be a good protein source for that. So I wouldn't suggest using collagen protein as a suitable replacement for a complete whole protein source.
Correct.
Or to use it in place for another supplemental protein like a whey protein powder. Because unlike whey, collagen is heavy, but the other side to that is, unlike whey or unlike animal proteins in general, collagen is heavy in 2 amino acids, which are glycine and proline, which can have benefits when it comes to your skin, your hair, your joints, and your tendons. So for example, one of the main reasons we see wrinkles in our skin is due to a decrease in collagen structure and the quality in the dermal layers as we age. And one of the main reasons this occurs is because glycine is one of the main amino acids in collagen, and it's highly underconsumed by people in our society today. So seeing as most of us don't eat, we don't eat nose to tail. So we're not eating bones or connective tissues. Many of us don't consume a ton of glycine, and most of us consume a lot of protein sources which are high in methionine, which actually lowers our glycine, or actually increases our glycine requirement, because it lowers total glycine to methionine ratio. So this is where using a collagen supplement could be beneficial to increase our intake of both glycine and proline. And I know that there's a researcher named Dr. Keith Barr who has done most of the research on collagen supplementation and exercise. And he's found that using between like 15 to 20 grams of collagen in combination with vitamin C, because vitamin C is involved in collagen synthesis, And this combination has led to improvements in injury recovery and decreases in joint pain. So if you're dealing with, say, a soft tissue injury or coming back from surgery, using it could be helpful as our rates of collagen synthesis go up when we ingest collagen, especially in conjunction with vitamin C, like I mentioned before. And so these two together are going to increase collagen synthesis. So this was actually something that I utilized prior to my rehabilitation sessions when I was coming back from surgery in 2021. So this is something I've utilized in and of itself. It's generally recommended 45 to 60 minutes before any load-bearing activity to take in a collagen protein source. And also increasing collagen supplementation or collagen synthesis is beneficial for tendon, ligament, and bone health, as well as is also good for injury prevention. So these are all the benefits that collagen can have. But when it really comes down to whether we should count it or whether we should add it in addition, if you're going to use collagen in addition to your current diet, realize that it's not a reliable or a good substitute for whole complete protein sources. So what I generally will have a client do is I wouldn't have a client count it towards their daily protein intake, as it doesn't stimulate muscle protein synthesis and shouldn't replace their actual protein or their complete protein sources. So for instance, if I have a client eating 35 grams of protein in a meal, I wouldn't have them take away 15 to 20 grams of a whole food protein source or a complete protein source, whether it be a whey protein shake or an animal-based protein or whatever it may be, and replace it with 15 to 20 grams of collagen. That's going to lower the total amino acid content of the meal itself. It's going to probably undershoot them in terms of the leucine threshold, which is about 2.5 to 3 grams per meal to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis. But what I would have is I would have them track the calories from them, as most of the supplements, considering the fact that they're like 15 to 20 grams of protein in total, are anywhere between 60 and 100 calories on average. So I would say track it towards your daily calorie intake, but don't track it in terms of your protein intake.
So I sit a little different than you. I actually count it towards my protein intake. But I also have like a 10 to 20 gram wiggle on my protein unless I'm in a deficit. But when
Let me ask you about that.
Yeah.
If you're adding it to a meal, so for instance, when do you add it in? And
I take it breakfast, post cardio, meal 1. I work out after meal 2.
And how much protein are you getting from a whole complete protein source in that
40
meal?
grams. So at that meal. Exactly.
Yeah, so
I look at it as addition on.
synthesis.
Yeah. I just put in my total so that way I understand the calories.
No, absolutely. No,
yeah. And that's where I think
in agreement
people,
with that.
Yeah. I think people screw this up and then they're like, oh, I'm just going to eat a bunch of collagen. I'm like, 1, that's very expensive. 2, that's very incomplete. And 3, are you taking copper and other things because you need these other things to make collagen work even more? It's really a big picture turbo thing. It's not just like I buy this product and it suddenly does all these things. You have to have a beautiful foundation in place for, in my opinion, collagen to work. Meaning I don't give sick people off the street collagen no matter what. I'm like, yeah, they're like, well, I want better skin. I'm like, great, eat better. And that will clear your skin up. Like the collagen to me is once people are really primed is when I put them in. Absolutely. Or they're injured or severely inflamed. I kind of like when I look at money of supplements, man, because that's the cost you have to consider nowadays. Like supplements aren't getting cheaper. You remember this, like 10 years ago, you could get 5 pounds of protein for $30. Like
that was about 15 or 20 years ago, my friend.
Yeah,
I was in the industry for 14 years.
Yeah, so it was early on. It was early on because I remember 2005. I used to get Optimum Whey for $26.99. And you don't ever get that anymore. And when you think about
5-pound tub is about $100.
Yeah, when you think about cost, I think it's a supplement that's great, but it's like a tier 2 supplement to me.
Absolutely.
And I think that I put it at tier 2, like that's kind of like similar to HMB. Like I'm one of those people like I notice a difference with HMB. Now, I think HMB is more 6 grams than 3 grams, like was done in the studies, but I notice a difference in my recovery of HMB. And I also have people who don't notice shit from collagen who've taken it for a while and just be like, hey, can I get rid of this? I don't really notice. So,
like I'll be honest with you, it's a very rarely used ancillary product. Obviously, I come from the supplement industry, so I have a vast knowledge on these type of things, but it isn't something that I generally will include in clients' program. Very rarely, unless they're coming back from injury, they have a soft tissue injury. They've just gotten surgery. This is a very time intensive or a time specific modality that I'll utilize. However, what I did comment on was the fact that I never have clients replace it, because I do have a lot of females that come to me and they've heard the benefits from a cosmetic or a visual perspective in terms of their hair, their skin, their nails from collagen. And so I noticed that their meal 1 is either primarily or completely just protein from collagen protein, or they're doing like a half and half blend, but they're only getting like 15 grams of a whole complete protein source. So they're not actually maximally stimulating muscle protein synthesis. And really, arguably, if any time of the day is most important for protein intake, it'd be the morning, because we're trying to break out of a state of being fasted and
Agreed.
we're in a catabolic state. So we want to essentially turn on that muscle protein synthetic machinery and get us in a state of anabolism. So we're building up net tissue. So if you're taking away from that and you think in your mind, because a lot of these individuals are like, well, I'm hitting 30, these females, hey, I'm hitting 30 grams of protein from, I'm hitting what would be like what people say 30 to 40 grams per meal. However, half of that is from an incomplete protein source. So it's not really getting you towards that goal. And that's where I will have them replace that with a whole complete protein source for that 30 grams. And if they're going to utilize a collagen, say that they like including in their breakfast smoothie or in their shake, whatever it may be, it's going on top, kind of like you're doing. So I did want to differentiate between that.
Yeah, I just think that to me, it's a tier 2 supplement. And I think there's a lot of other ones. It's a great question. But in the day and age where, you can easily rack up a $500 a month supplement bill without even really blinking, based upon everything you need that you read you need, in quotes, still tier 2.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. It's about tier 4 for me. But
okay. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, I think it's one of those things, like, it just seems it's a reasonable one to add for most people. And I think it does have enough there based upon the loose literature I've read of it. I still think jury's out on like how it really does, like, in people like you and I, because that's a whole different breed. When I read these studies, I take things like grain of salt when I read them, when it comes to like big athletes like you and I, who are heavy 5 days a week. We understand intensity, we understand maximum effort. That's why I'm like, okay, well, that supplement might be better for someone like me, but what does it really show? But like a gym pop person, I'm like, hey, if you got it, great. If you don't mind, keep buying it and you like it, awesome. If you don't really know the difference, ditch it. Like,
yeah,
get a good
like I said,
product.
For me, it's situationally dependent, but oftentimes someone will come to me and they're already utilizing it and say they haven't found any effect. They've just been told, they've seen some advertisements, they've been marketed to, and they ask me, hey, listen, now we're utilizing different supplements. Now I've started to incorporate a whey protein isolate, and now you have me using creatine. Do you think I still need to take the collagen protein? And unless they have an injury or something that we're honestly trying to mitigate, and there is actually research behind collagen being useful and very specifically useful for the outcome that we're looking for. If it's just body composition, I'm like, no, drop the collagen, don't spend, extra money on that. That is something that we could allocate towards a different supplement or just towards good nutrition, good food, and things of that sort. So especially in today's day and age, I think there's a big value for looking at the cost to benefit ratio of different modalities, whether it be supplementation or food, or, I just had a client ask me about peptides, and he was given this massive peptide protocol for a very well-known hormone replacement clinic. And when I looked at the bill, he said, is this worth it? And I said, absolutely not, by no means whatsoever.
What was it for?
CJC and ipamorelin. So it was a GH releasing peptide and a growth hormone.
Get yourself some
releasing hormone. And so really what it would honestly equate to probably what pharmaceutical GH would have been. And so, I really had to explain to him. I said, listen, it's, I understand that, you're going to a clinic, and I'm not trying to override the doctor or the nurse practitioner's suggestions or recommendations, but this is a cash business. So they are trying to make money. And really, when we think about it, let's think about your total monthly costs, and let's really allocate towards the things that are most important. Anything in life is about budgeting, whether it be your calorie budget or it be your actual financial budget. And really, when it comes down to it, these are not going to have such a substantial effect on your body composition outcomes that they're going to be worth the cost. The benefit does not outweigh the cost. And so really, when it comes down to supplementation, we need to look at what are the outcomes that we're looking for, what is our budget, and then also what is really going to be the benefit of this product in terms of what we're looking to get out of it. And that's really where it comes down to. Sometimes a product like collagen, situationally dependent. Other times there is supplementation that I would want to use with everyone most of the time. So something like a creatine monohydrate, something like a whey protein powder, or a high quality vegan protein powder. These are things that have great, maybe a caffeine product. These are things that have great evidence, great efficacy. And generally the products that have the most research behind them also tend to be the most, I don't want to say cheapest, but they're most reasonable in terms of cost.
Yep. I will say, though, to go peptide thing, and I know we got to wrap it up. I posted my story about my use of TB 500 and BPC, and someone did the math. And they're like, "That's so expensive." I'm like, "Yeah, man. Like peptides are pretty expensive. They're not the cheap shit they once were." And I can tell you the difference between 5 milligrams of TB 500 a week and 10 milligrams of TB 500 a week is night and day for your recovery. So it depends upon what you're trying to fight through and overcome. But I'm glad you brought up that peptide thing, because I've seen some of that from those clinics, and I'll be like, you already don't eat. Why are you going to get on semaglutide? Like, that is not a good option there. You know what I mean? And or different ones. And then there are some contexts where I'm like, well, hey, I would have actually probably told you to get the semaglutide, since you say like you have issues where you can't stop eating or things like that. That might be it. Although, like, I always tell people, like, I do know one person who has food aversions and can only eat 4 foods now. She's one of my friend's client wives, and she can only eat like 4 different foods, Brandon, after using semaglutide for 18 months.
Very
Like, she's been
interesting.
off for like 2-3 months, and she only can eat like 4 different foods, and it's like crap. You wouldn't want to eat like eggs. And so I was like, what? Like,
Interesting. No, I know
yeah,
that one of the effects of GLP-1 agonists is nausea or
yeah,
increased nausea. And that's one of the ways that honestly that it lowers appetite, other than the fact that it's secreting insulin from the pancreas. It's helping to, it obviously has an interaction with the hypothalamus and regulating satiety centers and things of that sort. But I've never heard of that effect. I've seen in some of the literature rapid weight regain, because obviously if we
yeah.
think about it, it's a massive appetite suppressant. It's working the brain. And once you discontinue the usage of these GLP-1 drugs, which are very, extremely efficacious. Like, they are so effective in terms of weight loss outcomes, in terms of the current limited literature that we have, that the only thing that they're comparative to is gastric bypass, which is amazing. However, I personally haven't utilized them with any clients. I haven't had any clients come to me that have been prescribed them first and foremost. So I don't have clinical practice or clinical experience with them. But the research that I have looked into, what we do see is massive weight regain. And then also in some trials, you'll see a large loss of lean body mass. And what they really don't control for, or what they're not saying in these trials, were these people resistance training and actually utilizing a high protein diet, and maybe they were under eating to the point where they weren't even getting enough protein per day. And so there are some net negatives, but like, as with anything, for every gimme there's a gotcha. So in any aspect of life, there's going to be pain to go through in order to get an outcome. So for instance, in the gym, we put ourselves under heavy load, we push our bodies to the limit to get an improvement in body composition. If you go through a procedure, so whether it be breast augmentation or you go for Botox or whatever it may be, there's going to be just some discomfort to look better in those interventions. And the same thing with these drugs. A lot of times I think that a lot of people are utilizing these pharmaceutical appetite suppressants and weight loss drugs, and they think it's an easy out, because when they're on the drug in and of itself, the only discomfort that a lot of people are reporting is this enhanced nausea. And that's usually just during the introductory phase, when your body has yet to adjust to it. However, think about the repercussions or the negative drawbacks of getting off that drug. Now you don't have regulation of your appetite and
Right.
satiety centers, and now you're going through binge eating periods or massive weight regain. That's going to be both psychologically and physiologically harmful. So for every give me there's a gotcha, and you really have to, instead of just jumping onto the newest intervention that you see promoted on Instagram, or that you see your favorites, you see Kim Kardashian promoting on, the media outlets, you have to really think, is this right for what I'm doing? Is this going to be a long-term solution? Is this going to be something that I can maintain and sustain? And is this going to be something that's going to have more positive impacts than it does have negatives? And that's really, this cost to benefit ratio that I think we all need to consider.
Agreed 100%, my man. Well, B, man, dude, it was nice chat with you always. I see you like in 3 days or some two
Yes,
days.
sir.
But where can everybody find you at?
Guys, feel free to reach out to me at Brandon DeCruz _ or on my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. Also, just a quick thing. I want to thank everyone that has reached out. I need to, post these on my stories. However, we got a massive amount of good feedback about the last episode that we did covering metabolic flexibility. So I'm really glad that everyone liked that episode. I know that I was actually just getting some more inquiries or more questions coming in about the podcast. So we will do another follow-up Q&A soon. We have a special guest on next week that I will not announce and yet. However, we're looking forward to having him back on. And other than that, Jeff, close us out, my man.
Jeff Unbreakable Black on Instagram, if I am not blacklisted like I tend to be. And you can find me on YouTube with Relentless Forever and relentlessforever.com. If you're in Nashville, you got yourself a badass gym called Iron House Strength and Conditioning. But otherwise, y'all check you later. You have yourselves a good day. Bye.